So we actually just did the Mishnah. We're starting on Yud Amud Aleph. We're starting Yud Amud Aleph, the Gemara. Basically, the Mishnah said that we had the stop of Shiloh. Shiloh was the big stop. It was more than 300 years, as we learned in the Rambam. So it was a big stop. So what happens, there were small stops. There was Gilgal, that was the first stop, which they had a Mizbeach. Then they had Shiloh, that was a big stop. And then they had Noiv and Givain, which were two small stops. And then they had the Beis HaMikdash. So we're going to learn that in between Shiloh and the Beis HaMikdash, once again, the Bamos, those private, small Mizbeach that people built, were permissible. But the Mishnah says that there's no difference between Shiloh and the Mishkan, but after Shiloh, they were permissible again. But after Yerushalayim, Kedushas Yerushalayim ein acharei heter. That's what we learned. That the sanctity of Yerushalayim doesn't have any allowance after that. So that means that once the Beis HaMikdash was built, then there's nothing that you can do a Bama anymore. So basically it means nowadays, after Yerushalayim, there is no Bama built. This is going to be now the topic of the discussion of the Gemara, whether the sanctity of Yerushalayim, what does it mean, the sanctity of Yerushalayim? When they conquered Eretz Yisrael and they conquered Yerushalayim, so it became Eretz Yisrael. It became holy. It became the place where you built the Mishkan. Was that a permanent Kedusha? Or it was only for the time, and once it's destroyed, the Kedusha left it? It's called like this, Kedusha Rishoina. Kedusha Rishoina means the first, the original Kedusha. It's Kitcha L'Shaita. It was Kodesh for the time, Ula Osid Lavai, and for the future to come. Or only Kitcha L'Shaita, only for its time. But you were not Mekadesh Ula Osid Lavai. Our Mishnah clearly states that Kedushas Yerushalayim ein acharei heter. Now, once there was the Kedusha of Yerushalayim, that you have to bring the Mizbeach there, it remains in ever for the Kedusha, the only place where there can be a Mizbeach, the only place there can be Bamis, nowhere. The only place to bring a korban is in the Beis HaMikdash. But that's the difference the Mishnah said between Shiloh. After Shiloh was destroyed, then they were allowed to bring the Bamis. But after Yerushalayim was destroyed, you can't bring any Bamis, it's done. And we learn it from a pasuk. Let's look at the Gemara. Zog the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Says Rabbi Yitzchak. Shamaiti. So that means I heard. That's his opinion. I heard. Shemakrivin the Beis Chonyoy Bizman Hazeh. Beis Chonya. What is this Beis Chonya? Rashi will explain. They built a Mizbeach in Egypt, a Bama in Egypt. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak believed that that Bama was for Hashem. It wasn't Avodah Zarah, it was for Hashem. But he says, I heard that you are, Shemaiti means I heard, I believe that you could offer in the Beis Chonyoy, in that Mizbeach that was built by the son of Shimon HaTzadik in nowadays. Nowadays meaning, even though there's no longer a Beis HaMikdash, we're talking about Shimon HaTzadik, Hoye Meshireh Knesset HaGdolah, we say in Pirkei Avos. He was by the destruction, by the end of the second Beis HaMikdash, His son was after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So he says that in Beis Chonya, which is a bama, you can bring Bisman Hazeh. Rashi, Beis Chonya. What does it mean, Beis Chonya? Beis Chonya means Mizbeach Chonya. That is the Mizbeach of Chonya. Who is this Chonya? Sagt Rashi, Benoi Shel Shimon HaTzadik, Bono b'Mitzrayim l'shem Shamayim. He built a bama, an elevated area in Egypt. The Shem Shamayim was for the sake of the heaven. As we'll see in the Gemara, there's actually a discussion whether it was for Shem Shamayim or it was for Avodah Zarah. But Rabbi Yitzchok says no, that it was, you can bring it today, which means that he holds, as the Gemara says, that it was l'shem Shamayim kedam rinon. B'Maseches Menachos Daf Kuf Tes Amud Beis, as we say in Tractate Menachos Kuf Tes Amud Beis. So the Gemara, Kosavar. So what's his opinion, Rabbi Yitzchok? First of all, he holds Beis Chonyoy is lav Beis Avodah Zarah. That this Mizbeach of Chonyoy is not a house of Avodah Zarah. Otherwise, you wouldn't be allowed to use it today. Why do we have to say that? So Rashi brings down because there is an opinion over there in the Gemara Menachos that he built it for Avodah Zarah. So the first thing we see from Rabbi Yitzchok's statement that it's not a base of Avodah Zarah. But what we also hear from there that the sanctity of the Beis Hamikdash is not permanent. And that's why the bombers, after the destruction, the Beis Hamikdash are permitted. V'kosavar, and he holds further, Rabbi Yitzchok, that Kedusha Rishono, the first sanctity when they made Yerushalayim holy, is Kitcha Lishato. It was sanctified for the time being, for the time they were in Yerushalayim. But it was not sanctified for the future to come. As long as the Jews were in Yerushalayim, as long as the Beis Hamikdash stood in Yerushalayim, that place, Yerushalayim, had the Kedusha of Yerushalayim. But after the destruction, Lo Kitcha. Kedusha Rishono, Kitcha L'Shaita, for the time that it was standing, was Kodesh. But Lo Kitcha L'Oshet, he did not make Kaddish for the future. So Rashi, because Sovar Kedusha, Sheniskachi Yerushalayim, this Kedusha that Yerushalayim was sanctified, ain't no Kedusha Lo'ilam. It's not an eternal Kedusha. Umeshacharva Hutru Abamis. Once Yerushalayim was destroyed, then the Bamis were permitted. The Loikitcha La'asilav, it didn't Mekadosh the future, which means La'asilav means Kloim Mishetechra. He didn't Mekadosh for the future, which means he was only Mekadosh it for the time being while it's settled. He was not Mekadosh it for the time that it will be destroyed. So he says like this, the Ksiv, because the Pasuk says, Dvarim Yud Beis, Ki leibosem ad oto el hamenucha vel hanachla. Moshe Rabbeinu was telling the Yidden that you had not yet come up till this point. You have not come yet to the place of relaxation and to the place of inheritance. Basically, he was telling them you had not yet reached the Beis Hamikdash. But instead of saying one statement, you haven't come yet up till this point, you have not come yet to Menucha, or Tanakh says both. You had not come yet to Menucha, and you had not come yet to Menachala. This is understood that there was one place where the Yidden had Menucha, and there was another place where they had Nachal. The Menucha they had by Mishkan Shiloi, they had it in Shiloi. That was the time when the conquering of Eretz Yisrael was mostly done, So therefore they came to Menucha at that point, Mishkan Shiloi. And then Nachala is the time when Yerushalayim, the inheritance, when Yerushalayim was built. So this pasuk is alluding to the two Mishkans, to the two times of Menucha, the Mishkan Shiloi, And the Nachala, it's Yerushalayim. And since the pasuk puts them together, Menucha and Nachala, which is Shiloh in Yerushalayim, so therefore Rabbi Yitzchak is of the view that it's not a permanent, just like the Menucha, the Shiloh. After it was destroyed, Shiloh is no longer the place of the Beis Hamikdash. It went over to Yerushalayim. That's of course, because that was the permanent place, right? Or at least that was the place later on. So he says the same thing is when they came to the Nachala, when they came to Yerushalayim, it was only for the time being. So let's read the Gemara. So it's like this: Menucha zu Shiloh. Menucha, relaxation, that's Shiloh, that's when they ended up conquering. And Nachala zu Yerushalayim, that is Yerushalayim. And we're saying that Makish Nachala leMenucha. The pasuk equates Menucha Nachala. The pasuk equates Nachala is like Menucha. To tell you that Ma Menucha yesh acharei heter, just like Menucha, which is when they rested, which is in Shiloh. After the destruction of Shiloh, there is a heter. You can go ahead and make an abamo. Af Nachlo yesh acharei heter. So also the inherited, the place of Yerushalayim, there is a heter. After the destruction of Yerushalayim, you can go ahead and bring a bama again. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak. Because Rabbi Yitzchak says it was Kedusha Rishayno, Kedusha L'Shaita, and that's why you can go ahead and bring in Beis Chonyoy, because it's not Avodah Zarah, number one. And number two, after the destruction of Yerushalayim, it's okay to bring a korban on a bama which is not in Yerushalayim.
So would he say that we could build a bama in Sharon, Massachusetts?
Probably, according to him. I mean, it needs other requirements. Today you're Tomei over here. There's other issues that you have. But we're talking about conceptually, theoretically, according to his view, yeah. But the halacha is not like his view. The halacha is, as we'll see in a minute, that the kedusha Rishayna is kitchel la'asid lavei, that it is kedusha. That's what the Mishnah said. The Gemara Mishnah says, "Ukedushas Yerushalayim ein acharei heter." That there's no heter after kedusha Yerushalayim. That was the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak. But look at this. Amru lei. So the Chachamim said to Rabbi Yitzchak, "Amarta, did you really say this?" You know, they were challenging him, saying, Amarta, did you say this? Did you really say that you can bring a korban today in Beis Chanya? Did you really say that? Amar Lahu says, no, I didn't say that. He wouldn't admit that he said it. Amar Rabba says, Rabba Halikim, I promise by God, Amra, he said it. He says, I promise that he said it. And I heard it from him. I learned it from him. So in other words, he did say it. He says he said it, that you can bring a Beis Chanye, Shomaiti, that you can do that in Beis Chanye Manazeh. So frag the Gemara, my time so what's the reason, and what is the reason that he is retracting? If he said it, why is he so afraid to say that he said it? And the Gemara says, Mishum Kashya de Rabbi Mori, because of the question of Rabbi Mori. The Rabbi Mori asked the question. I guess this is from our Mishnah, right? It says in our Mishnah, Kedushas Shiloh yesh acharei heter, Kedushas Yerushalayim ein acharei heter. The Mishnah says that the Kedushas of Shiloh, Kedushas Shiloh, says the Mishnah, yesh acharei heter, which means, as Rashi says, that when it was destroyed. So he asked the question for our Mishnah over here, which it says very clearly, so that's the challenge. Okay. There's also another Mishnah. The Mishnah in Zvachim, Daf Yud Beis Omid Beis. Over there it says, Mishabol Yerushalayim, once they came to Yerushalayim, Nesru HaBamis, the Bamis have become prohibited. And they had no more, never permitted. It was never permitted again. And that was the inheritance, was Yerushalayim, and that's it. The pasuk says so in that pasuk, that was Yerushalayim, and that's it.
So, but Rabbi Yitzchak wasn't. He said they actually had it. He wasn't saying you can. He said they were doing it.
Yeah. So
I
that's why when I translated it, yeah, go ahead. I translated it as Shamaiti. When he said Shamaiti, doesn't mean just I heard something. It's not the news. He was ruling it that way. He's not saying, oh, somebody told me a story. He wouldn't quote it in that way. He quoted it to say that it's the case, that he believes that. Otherwise, we wouldn't challenge him. When he says that, it's not just Tamase saying it. Just, oh, I heard something on the radio. Some people are doing it. And that's why the Gemara goes through and saying what he holds. Kosovar, the Kosovar, he holds that it's not Avodah Zarah, and he holds that. That means because that was his opinion.
So this must have been. I'm guessing this wasn't like a Reform rabbi having a barbecue in his backyard. This was a big shul with, it wasn't just some guy cutting, slaughtering a goat in his backyard.
We have to look in the Gemara over there exactly the laws of Bama and everything else, but whatever it was. We'll leave it at that. I mean, you see, there was one opinion that says it was Avodah Zarah. Rashi brought down, so it wasn't even so clear. He holds that it was L'Shem Shamayim, so it could even be it's Avodah Zarah. So why would you want to have a big shul over there? I don't know. I don't know what the facts were, but it was rather, apparently it was a strange phenomenon. He didn't have. Why would he say about one place over there, and why would the Gemara talk about in Menachos about one place? I mean, if there were like dozens of these places around, so I don't know. I don't think so. Okay, but we'll leave it at that. Let's go weiter. So the Gemara says Tanoihi. The Gemara says this is actually a disagreement of Tanoi. It's not so simple. Even though our Mishnah, the Mishnah Zvachim, they both clearly state that there is no allowance for a bama after the destruction of Yerushalayim, but yet there is a machlokes of Tanoi. The Tana, we learned in the Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Edius Ches Vav. The rabbis were testifying about various different halachas. So over there it says, Omar Rabbi Wolosow. Rabbi Wolosow says, Shamaiti, I heard. Again, the language of Shamaiti means that, he believes that is the halacha. When they were building in the Heichal, and that was talking about in the second Beis Hamikdash, they were trying to get the Beis Hamikdash ready to build the second Beis Hamikdash. Now, in order to bring korbanos, you need a mizbeach. But also by the mizbeach, it says Asher Pesach Oyel Moed. It has to be in the front of the entrance to the Oyel Moed. So in a way, you need the Oyel Moed, and then you need the mizbeach standing in front of it, and actually you also need a courtyard and a zorah. But before they actually were able to build all these components to make it a real mishkan, they still wanted to bring korbanos. They built the mizbeach and wanted to bring korbanos. They didn't want to wait. Rashi pointed out that it took them 22 years later on that it took them to build the entire Beis Hamikdash, the second Beis Hamikdash, not wanting to wait all the time. So what they did was they built partitions. They used curtains as the Oyel Moed, curtains around the Azorah, the Chotzer, and that was served. And the fact that they had to build these things almost shows that the sanctity that was there before did not remain, because otherwise, even without those walls, it's still the entrance of the Oyel Moed that was there, because that Kedusha was there. it doesn't seem that they would need it. Let's see in the statement what he says. So he says like this: Shamaiti, I heard when they were building inside in the Heichal, they were building basically the room in which the Mizbeach, the Shulchan, the Menorah, all the vessels of the Mishkan was, that's in the Heichal. So when they were building in the Heichal, so out of respect, so what they did was they had a inner circle of the curtains, and outside of the curtains they worked to build the actual room, and then they would remove the curtains. They'd have the room over there. So oisin kloim laheichel or kloim laazara. So when they were building it, they made curtains for the heichel instead of the real wall, and also kloim laazara, instead of the partition of the azara of the courtyard, they had kloim, they had curtains. Rashi kloim laheichel. So the understanding is now, the thought right now is that these kloim served in the place of the walls of the heichal. They're supposed to be the walls. So in the place of the wall of the heichals, they built these curtains. Sheyehei mizbeach habonui ba'azore korui asher pesach al moed. So in order that the Mizbeach that is built in the courtyard, you should be able to say that it was at the entrance of the Oyel Moed. They needed curtains there because that the curtains allowed for an entrance to go in through the curtains. So they needed that. She'ilmoli Cain, had it not been for that, Lahoyu Makrivim, then they would not be able to bring the korban Achi Gomer Habinyan until the building would be concluded. Behem hischilu lahakriv korbanos, but they didn't want to wait until the finishing of the building, because they began to bring korbanos mishabou shom b'mei kodesh in the days of kodesh. They came to Eretz Yisrael from Babel. So they started bringing korbanos right away. It took 22 till under 22 years later on, the structure has not been completed. That was done b'shnas Shavas Shalosh Daryavish Achre. The later Daryavishes, few Daryavishes, but it was the last one, the last 3 years. So it was 22 years later after they first started building in Kodesh. They didn't want to wait all this time not to bring the korbanos. So they put the kloim, so that way they would have oil moed over there. They put the kloim around the azara and around the heichal, so they had a Beis Hamikdash there. So while we do the kloim leichel the kloim, but there's a difference. In the heichel they would build in the outside, which means they put the kloim inside. The workers worked outside of the partitions. These kloim were spread out inside of the thickness of the wall. The wall was built outside of the curtains. You didn't want the builders to go inside of the heichel itself, because the heichel was covered with these curtains. So they worked outside of the curtains. But in the azora, they built from the inside, and the curtain was outside of the builders. That's the opinion of Rabbi Wolosow. The Gemara assumes that because he needed to build these walls instead of the walls of the Heichal, Rashi says Kosal Kadaiter, and we want to call it Pesach Oyel Moed. Without it, it wouldn't work. Why is that? It must be, that's what the Gemara assumes, because the Kedusha that it had before has gone away once the Beis Hamikdash Harishon was destroyed. So now when they're building it, they have to make a new Kedusha, because Kedusha Rishoina is Kitcha L'Shaita, but not La'osid Love. That's the thought now. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, the Gemara learns Rabbi Yeshua disagrees with Rabbi Wolosow. He says, Shamaiti shemakrivim afal pishein bais. I heard that you can bring a korban, even there's no Beis Hamikdash. Abama is okay. We don't need. They didn't have to have the kloyim over there. Oichli kochi kadoshim. You can eat kochi kadoshim like a korban chatas, which is called kodesh kadoshim. That means that it's only eaten to the males. It can only be eaten in the Azorah, not in all of Yerushalayim. So he says you can eat the kochi kochim apish and kloyim. So you don't have any curtains around the Azorah, and you brought a korban on the mizbeach. You brought a korban on the mizbeach, so you can go eat in the Azorah without the curtains there, because the curtains that were there before the Azorah still remain. This is still the Azorah; it remains. So you don't need anything. It's good enough. Kochuv kalim u'maiser sheni, and the same thing is for the kochuv kalim and maiser sheni. You don't need a wall around Yerushalayim. Kochim kalim can be eaten in all of Yerushalayim. Same thing, maiser sheni, you bring up from the crops, you bring it up to Yerushalayim. It has to be in Yerushalayim. Is afal pi shein chayma, even though there is no wall there. Why? Because the first sanctity became holy for that time, and kitchelos and love. So therefore, we don't need any kloyim. We don't need anything. We don't need no bayis. We don't need anything to make it. So it seems like Rabbi Yeshua disagrees with Rabbi Lazar over here. Since Rabbi Yeshua says that kedusha rishono, kitchel l'shaita v'kitchelos and love, and that's why you don't need no kloyim, not for the kochi kadoshim, and not the choyim for the kochim kalim. Is meklal, so we can derive from the Rabbi Lezer Sovar, like kitchelos love, that he holds that you did not mekadesh it losid love. So the Gemara says, therefore, that's why there's a machloikis. Tanoihi, machloikis between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Lezer said they needed to be the kloim in order to make the kedusha anew in the Beis Hamikdash, while they wanted to bring korbanos, and Rabbi Lezer said you didn't need to bring the kloim because kitchel little shaitel just lost love it. Rashi, lav, they're not the cloud Rabbi Lezer, the boy kloim summer. He requires these curtains. He holds loy kitchel achar churban, that it wasn't kodesh after the churban. The fikoch pirsu kloim b'mekoyim binyan. That's why they needed to spread out these curtains in the place of the structure until they get the structure in place. And they went back and they sanctified the place with thanks and with song, as the Gemara the Gemara says there that they were mekadosh, so there was a new kedusha, because the kedusha Rishono was not go lost love. Only for the first base of it didn't help for the second base. That's the Gemara's thought now. But the Gemara is going to object, similar to the question that Roy asked me before. The Gemara is going to object to this interpretation, and the Gemara is going to say maybe they used the curtains for another reason. Maybe it wasn't, as Rashi pointed out a few times, that the thought was that the kloyim substituted for the wall because they needed to make a new kedusha. And the Gemara says, no, that's maybe it didn't need a new kedusha. The original kedusha stayed, and they put the curtains on there just for modesty, not for the purpose of kedusha, not the purpose of wall. Amalei Ravina Rabashi. So Ravina says to Rabashi, Mimai, how do we know this? How do we know that this is really the machloikis, the disagreement between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Lazar? How do we know that it's about whether the Kloim needed to make the new Kedusha because the first Kedusha wasn't there. Dilma, perhaps, the Kula Alma Kedusha Rishoina, maybe they all agree. Rabbi Yeshua also agrees. Rabbi Lezer also agrees that the Kedusha Rishoina Kitcha L'Shaita v'Kitcha L'Osulav. That it was L'Osulav. We don't have to do anything else, just like Rabbi Lezer holds. So how come there is such a disagreement? Umar, and each person, each rabbi, what he heard, that's what he said. He says, I heard that they built that way with the Kloim. Umar, what he heard, he said, it's not because they needed Kedusha over there. It was Kedusha was there without it. Umar, each one said what he heard. Why did he need the Kloim? Okay, you heard that. But what was the purpose for the Kloim? The Gemara says. That was just made for modesty. In order, they didn't want the workers to be there where the inside and everything else, so they made the Kloim, but it wasn't a purpose. So basically, from this mission in Adius, we cannot learn that there is a machloikas about it and that Rabbi Yeshua holds that way. We can't say that. All right. So where is the Tanoim? We said, the Gemara says, Ella, but rather, Kehani Tanoim. It's these Tanoim. These previous Tanoim are, the Gemara rejects them. We don't have evidence. So the Gemara finds other Tanoim. The Tanya. This is a Braisa. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi. This is Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi says, Lama manu chachamim es elam. Why did the chachamim enumerate these? In the Gemara in Orchim, over there, the Gemara discusses about the law when you sell a city, a house in a walled city. Over there, there's different halachas for a walled city, that if you sell a house in a walled city, and if you don't redeem it right away, says the halacha there, then it remains sealed and you can't redeem it any further. Basically, in a regular city, if you sell a house, you have the right to go back and repurchase your house and pay the person the money and get your house back. But in a Arechaima, the house is sealed. After you have a year, 2 years to reclaim it. If you don't, it's sealed. And the Gemara over there, in the last chapter of Orchim, enumerates all these cities that had a wall around them. So Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yossi says, why is it specifically count these cities? Because when we go back and we take a look at how many cities had walls, it was a lot more than that. So why did they single out? They counted 9 over there. No more than 9, Rashi says. How come they singled out these cities to mention them, the Gemara? There must be a reason. Because they're trying actually to say that only these cities are considered walled cities because they were retaken later on and they got the Kedusha, but not the ones that was destroyed. Let's look inside. Lama manu cham meselu, Dr. Rashi selu. Ayoris nimnu beperik pasra de orchim. There are cities that have been enumerated in the last perek in Tractate Orchim. Over there, the discussion is li'inyan bote orechima, that is in relation with regards to these houses that are sitting in a walled cities, bote orechima, houses in walled cities. Loimar to say, Shahoyu Mukofes Chayma Mimois Yeshua ben Nun, that they are the ones that had the wall from the days Yeshua ben Nun, and they constitute the Bata Orechayma, because these were the walls that came from Yeshua ben Nun. Over there is no more than 9. Those are the 9 that the Chachamim enumerate over there in Archim. So he says, V'lom amonim. So why did they count them? In other words, Valai Harbe Hoyu Sham. There were many there. So why did they count only these? V'oser Nami Tanan. And we also learned over there in the Mishnah, V'chol Kayetz Ben. It counts 9. It says anybody that is similar to them. So why does he only count 9? So he says, Sheksha'olu b'nei hagoyla. For when the people of the exile in the time of Ezra, they went up to the second Beis Hamikdash, Motzu es elu. They found this. V'kitchum. And they sanctified them. So these 9 cities were sanctified. Abul Horishonos, but the earlier ones, the ones that were there from before, Batlu Mishabat La'aretz, they became negated. They were absolved, taken away once the land is no longer there.
What does that mean? They sanctified them.
They made them back into the sanctity of Yerushalayim, of the sanctity of the walls. They became cities of Eretz Yisrael, not Yerushalayim. Sorry, they became back cities of Eretz Yisrael. Otherwise, they don't have a status of Eretz Yisrael. It would not count for the Bata Orechayma. So they came back and were Makadosh them. So it was actually only 9, or maybe some like them, but that was it. But all the others. So what do we see from this Braisa? Alma, Kosovar. So what does Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi hold? This particular rabbi. He holds Kedusha Rishoina, Kitcha L'Shaito, that it was only sanctified for the time, but like Kitcha L'Osid Lovei, but he did not sanctify it for the future to come. So it only lasted for the time of the Bayis Rishon, and not for the Bayis Sheni. So therefore, they needed to come back and be mekadosh them in order for them to get the status of Bata Orechayma. Otherwise, they didn't have that status anymore. But the Gemara says, Uriminu, I will challenge this opinion of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. We find in another Braisa, which the same Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi seems to clearly say that it is Kitcha L'Shaito L'Osid Lovei. Rashi says, Uriminu, this is not a new question. This is the end. The Gemara says, Kehani Tanoi. So this is the first Tana, and now we're going to bring you the second Tana. The Gemara says, Uriminu, Zuktrashi Maskona de Milsehu. This is the conclusion of the matter. The Omar Le'il, he said before that Hani Tanoim Pligi B'Kitchu Le'Kitcha. These Tanoim. So he only brought down one Tana. This is the second Tana. It happens to be the same Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, but the Gemara is going to say there's 2 opinions in what Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi holds. The Gemara wants to show that in this Braisa he holds that Kitcha L'Shaita and Kitcha L'Osid Lovei. What did Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi say? He says, V'chi elu b'levad hoyu. Were these the only ones, those 60, those 9 that were mentioned in the Gemara in Orchim there? Elu b'levad. But like Kfar Nemar, but it says in Devarim, Pei Gimel Daled, it says, Shishim ir kol chevel argev. Over there, the pasuk says, we conquered everything. Shishim ir was 60 cities. And then the pasuk says further, Kol Eila Orim B'tzuras Chayma. They were all fortified by a wall, Gavoya, a high wall. Losai Mabrich, there were doors and locks. So you see, there were at least 60. So Amar Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yosi, or these the only ones? We're 60 city. And that's the rope, the way they used to measure it. Big cities. Uksiv, and it says, they were all fortified cities with high walls. So why did they say only 9? So why did Chachamim count these? So he says, for when the Bnei HaGoyla went up, Matzu Eilu v'Kitchum. So basically, they found all these cities, and they were Makadosh them. These cities that he counts over there. So the Gemara says, Kitchum, Hashto. Now they were sanctified. It seems like in this statement of this last statement of Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yosi, seems like they were Makadashim. It seems to say the same thing as Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yosi said before. But here, in this statement, there's a second statement, Ha'amri, but they say that you don't. That's a Mishnah. In the end of that Mishnah, it says, Rashi says there's a Mishnah. They say over there, you don't have to be in the end of this Maseifa, it says, the Loi Tzricha Likedushi. The Kol Masayim Ba'osel says, anytime something comes up in your hand by tradition from your fathers, that there was a wall over there, that's considered to be a walled city. That's part of that same statement. So how could Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yosi say that they went and they were Makadosh them now? It seems like the same Yishmael as before, but in this Mishnah it says differently. It says, but he corrects it. Elo, but rather, Motru es Elu Umonu. They found them, so they counted these. So the reason why the Braisa counts, why did the Chachamim count these, is because they happened to come across. These were the ones that they found. But V'lo Elu Bilvad, that's not alone. El Kola Shel Tale, L'chom HaSoyres B'Yedecha Ma'Vesecha. Any time that you have come up with a tradition in your hands from your fathers, Shemukef Es Choymamish, Moshe Yeshua Ben Nun, that place has been surrounded by all Yeshua Ben Nun, all these mitzvahs apply to that. It's called a walled city for everything. You don't need a new kedusha. That's everything. Because the first sanctity is for the time, and love it. So that's why they just counted those. So his answer, they counted those because that's what. What does it mean, all these mitzvahs? Kol mitzvah lalu, hanahegez b'achayma. First of all, shiluach mitzvah. The mitzvah is sent out of a city that has a wall. Ukriyas Megilah b'chamisha, reading the Megilah on the 15th versus the 14th. After a year, the house that you sell after a year, if you didn't redeem it, it stays complete. Can't redeem it anymore. So frag the Gemara. So we have a problem. Kasha Rabbi Shmuel. So in the second Brais Rabbi Shmuel, you fixed it to Motzei L'monum because it says clearly Kitchel L'shaita v'Kitchel L'osid Lovei. And in the first Brais Rabbi Shmuel says that it was only for the time being. The Gemara says Trei Tanoi Alibe the Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yosi. So these are the two Tanoim. They disagree what Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yosi said. But in any event, we have two Mishnah. We have two Tanoim. One says Kitchel L'Shaita, Kitchel L'Osid Love, and one says no, only Kitchel L'Shaita, not L'Osid Love. And these are two Tanoim disagreeing what Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Yossi said. Anybody say more? Another answer I can give you. This other Tana is Takanat Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, or Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi. It's confused between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Yossi. Tanya, Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi Omar. So Taka, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, he Taka holds that only Kitchel L'Shaita, not L'Osid Love. But here in the second brayso where it says Kitchel L'Shaita, L'Osid Love, is actually Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi, not Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Tanya, Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi Omar, he says, Pasuk says Asher Loi Choyma. So it says Loi with a vav and an aleph, that it has a chayma, it doesn't have a chayma. He says Afal Pisha Ein Loi Achshav V'Hoyu Loi Kodim L'Keim. He says it doesn't matter if he has now than if he had before, it's still good because the first kedusha stays. Afal Pisha Ein Loi, even though it doesn't have. That's why it says doesn't have, meaning it doesn't have now. It had a wall once. It's both. It had Loi to it and Loi no. It's now even though it had before. That's what he holds, that the first kedusha did not bottle because the churban b'hainu tanoi. These are the tanoi. I don't understand so much. I have to look it up to find the tana that holds that kedusha kamaisa lebotlo. The Gemara already brought down both our Mishnah and also the Gemara in Zvachim. So the reason the Gemara wants to say Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi, I understand, is because Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi got confused with Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi. So I understand why the Gemara wants to find Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yossi. But this that Rashi says V'hainu Tanoi, okay, maybe because the Gemara says Tanoi, but the real Tana that we wanted to find is the one that says that it's not Kitchel L'Osid Love, because we said that he had Charota, that the reason he retracted was specifically for this reason. All right, so let's leave this part over here. We'll start over here in Mitzvah Shem next time. Let's just give over a word on the parsha. So again, we're going to be reading today the portion of Toldus. So I was at the conference, and it was a very inspiring conference. And one of the lessons the Rebbe learns from this week's parsha is how much Yitzchak tried to deal with Esav. He tried to bring him in, like he tried to give him the brachas. He tried to help him out in various different ways. He loved him. It says Kitzayit B'fiv. He fed him, and so I guess the unique connection between Yitzchak and Esav. That notwithstanding that Esav left the religion, he moved away, but still Yitzchak tried his hardest to try to help his son, to try to help Esav, even though he did terrible things, but he still was working very hard to try to bring him back, to try to give him a part of it. Rebbe brings the comparison between the relationship between Yishmael and Avraham and Esav and Yitzchak. He says Yishmael was not considered to be Jewish. Even though we read that he did teshuvah at the end of his life, he put Yitzchak in front of him. He went back, but still, he's not considered to be Jewish. On the other hand, Esav, who doesn't say that he did teshuvah, we don't find that. And matter of fact, when it came to the time of burial in Yaakov, he objected. But yet, Esav is considered to be Jewish. There's a fascinating story in the Gemara. I believe in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara says that when they were coming to bury Yaakov in the Maras Machpelah, Esav came to object. Esav said, listen, there's 8 spots over there, Adam and Chava, and then Sarah and Rivka, Rachel and Leah. I mean, Sarah and Rivka, Sarah and Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka. Now you buried Leah in there, so my turn. I get one part. So he tried to stop me. So it says that one of the sons of Yaakov banged him with a stick, and his head fell into the lap of Yitzchak. So that's what the Gemara says. So Rebbe says, if Esau was such a Russia, how could he be in the lap of Yitzchak? In the Maras Machpelah, it says you're not allowed to have a tzaddik buried next to a Russia. It's an interesting story in the Navi that they once, in the cave of Elisha, was a tzaddik, a prophet. They threw in a Navi HaSheker, a false prophet in there, and the person got up, came alive again because he's not supposed to be in that place. So so how could it be? So the Rebbe explains that each one of the fathers, Abraham and Yitzchak, gave something to their children. So notwithstanding that Esav, in a open way, seemed to be a Russia, but his head, if you separated his head from his body, as in this case, his head remained good. Yitzchak gave him an essence of his Yiddishkeit, of who he is, even though, so when he went out, when you connect his head to his body, when you look at what he's doing and what he's going, he may do bad, things that are wrong, but the head of Esav always remains. It ended up together with Yitzchak. It didn't change that. On the other hand, Yishmael, he did tshuva, but then after Avram, Rebbe explains the difference of the approach of Avram. Avram was always chesed. Avram was giving everybody. But because Avram gave and it went into the lowest of levels, the people there didn't really fully get it. They didn't change them around. They said, thank you, Hashem. They just said lip service, but it didn't really bring about a change in them. So the way Avram influenced on a temporary basis, it was on a surface level, it was on a superficial level. And yes, it had good results for the time that he was there. But once he left, it was gone, it was over. Yitzchak, on the hand, he was level of Gevurah. He wanted refinement. He gave something of his refined status to Esav. Yes, he couldn't change him around. So Esav, connected to the body, goes away, but his essence was always good. It was not a Russia. His essence remained connected in the lap of Yitzchak. And the Rebbe says, and I was at the convention, the meeting, and you hear and you see all the great things that all the shluchim are doing all over the world. First of all, it's humbling. You think about what you do, you just do a fraction. There's so many people that are doing like outstanding. And there was one story, that they gave over. So this rabbi, while he was dating his bride, says, listen, we're going to go on shalichus, any opportunity. But she said, one place I don't want to go. I don't want to go to Russia. They have a lot of today. If you look, Ukraine, after the United States, has the most shluchim. They have all over, every little town over there, and every little place, big place, small places. So this guy was offered a place in Russia and in Siberia. And I ain't going to Siberia, but anyways, the head shliach, Rabbi Lazar from Moscow, chief rabbi of Russia, he said, go to try it out. You don't have to take the job. Go take a look what it looks like. The day he went there, so he went for a week. Took a look, the shul was broken down. There was nobody coming. It was just deserted. It was desolate. So the next day when he was there was a pogrom in the shul. Some anti-Semites broke into the shul. They ripped all the siddurim that were there, threw them on the floor. They took the Sefer Torah, desecrated it. They drew swastikas on the walls and everything. And this right away drew the major attention from all of the authorities, because they're very sensitive not to have any anti-Semitism over there. And they asked him, the newspaper came to him, are you the rabbi? You're the rabbi, you're the rabbi. He was just there for a week. And all the newspapers were going on and saying, and they called right away, we have to stop this, the program, because he went back to Eretz Yisrael, and then, after 2 months, he was sitting there and talking to his wife, and they're having a discussion. He says to his wife, the whole world knows that we're the rabbi and Rebbe, we're the shluchim of Siberia besides us. The Eibishter sent us there. There's no, anyways, they ended up going, they built up a beautiful place over there. And he just married off his daughter over there in Siberia. And then said, you see, the Hand of Hashgacha, he says, if the people that made the pogrom would know what the pogrom caused, they would think twice. But they actually, this was actually the impetus for, Dafka, because they are against this. We're Dafka going to. So that's the lesson, and hopefully we'll be able to do what we're supposed to. And what time are we going to meet next week? The same time? Or Wednesday at 7? What's better?
I mean, this time is good for me.
Okay, good for me. How about you, Ray?
Good. So this was 7:15, right?
7:15 on Tuesdays. Beautiful.
Yeah. Okay.
So I see everybody next week. Mitzvah Shem. And have a good week till then.
Have a good week. A good
We'll
Shabbos.
see you then. Good Shabbos. Thank you.
Thank you.